So that gives me the chance to introduce our next practitioner panel. And Vasan, if you don't mind turning off your video, that'd be great. Thank you. Perfect. And I'm very excited to hear from these guys at Flashpoint and their guests, because this company is actually right at the forefront of protecting us all from some of these consequences. So Ian, why don't I turn it over to you and you can introduce your panelists. Thank you very much.
Great, Kathleen, and thank you for a great panel. So we're going to be talking through the Seedier side of automation and associated fraud and compliance issues. And so we're going to be interpreting automation as threat actors scaling their operations, their capabilities through both low sophistication and open source tooling, but also high sophistication and custom malware, or more sophisticated tactics, techniques, and procedures. And these tactics might be amplified when we consider the prospects of new artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, Bard, China's Baidu's version of Ernie, or ChatGPT Ernie. But to introduce my panel, and maybe start with myself, I'm a former US Navy officer. I'm currently a vice president at Flashpoint, where I provide threat intelligence to our clients to help mitigate a variety of threats, a lot of it stemming from unindexed portions of the internet. I'm also working on my PhD in computer science at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering, where I focus on internet measurement and looking at a lot of these cybercrime communities. So go Violets. I'm also an adjunct professor at Fordham University's Master of Cybersecurity program, where I teach a course on cyber tech policy. I'm joined by Tom Armstrong from TRM. Tom is coming to us as a compliance advisor, and TRM is a leader in blockchain intelligence. He's bringing a wealth of knowledge on financial crime and the methods to combat it. He's got over a decade of experience in money laundering and related compliance issues. Prior to working at TRM, he started Goldman Sachs' first dedicated financial crime compliance team, covering blockchain-based assets, and served as an advisory capacity across a number of business verticals. He also led Goldman Sachs' transaction surveillance team and served as head of financial intelligence unit at forensics group teams. Tom and I had the pleasure of working together on a joint paper with our companies. So as a shameless plug, check out Crypto, Cash Outs, and Closures, Surveying the Darknet Ecosystem in the Wake of Hydra Market, where we used both deep and dark web intelligence and blockchain intelligence to understand how adversaries are using some of the things that we'll talk through today. And lastly, but certainly not least, Michelle Lamb, a senior cybersecurity threat intelligence analyst, and also producer host of the Cyber and Crime Files podcast. She's worked on national television true crime reporters for several networks. She's conducted research and produces threat intelligence, briefs on the dangers threat actors pose to certain industries, and she's the producer and host of the Cyber and Crime Files podcast. And besides having degrees in cybersecurity, she also has a master's of studies in law with a focus in compliance and ethics. So now that I've thoroughly embarrassed our panelists, and I feel that I'm also outmatched and outwitted here, I wanted to get the ball rolling with Tom to ask about some low sophistication methods that threat actors are using to take advantage of both the technology and the policies that legitimate companies are enacting to scale their operations. And I think synthetic identity fraud would be the best example, where adversaries might try to sidestep certain KYC, know your customer controls, which a lot of companies have streamlined through automation. And synthetic identity fraud, for those that aren't aware, is using bots or software to generate or combine various pieces of information to create legitimate looking profiles. So I'll be quiet now and ask Tom, maybe if you can start by just talking about some methods they're employing.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ian. Thanks to NYU for putting on this great series. I really enjoyed the last panel. That was incredibly interesting, and it's great to be here with Michelle and Ian. Yeah, I mean, fraud it's hard to realize the scale of the problem with fraud. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The UK government has kind of recently ratcheted up as one of their kind of top national security priorities. The US has been talking about this for years, but it's happening at a scale that is really hard to combat. In fact, most institutions have an accepted limit of fraud that they are willing to just kind of accept as the cost of doing business. It's so difficult to control. And as Ian said, one of the principal reasons behind that is from the automation on the control side. as companies are trying to create a frictionless process for its customers. If you imagine opening up an Amazon account or a credit card account or something like that, and they were to say, we'll get back to you in a week whether your account is good to go or not, you'd go somewhere else, right? And so this ability for users to, or I guess not the ability, but I guess the desire for users to be able to start, immediately upon opening an account of any kind, whether it's, financial or transactional, crypto, whatever it may be, means that the companies on the other end are automating these control processes. And, they're trying to scan names and dates of birth and that type of thing against, known bad actor lists and sanctions lists and that type of thing. But they're incredibly easy to circumvent. And so, this kind of, we call it at TRM, we say it's kind of a race to the bottom from a know your customer perspective. And that's allowing kind of circumvention and fraud of these controls, happening at just a tremendous large scale. And so as we talk about the issues of kind of automation and all the good that it can kind of bring to customer experiences and to businesses and to finance and that type of thing, the downside, and that's kind of what I guess what we'll talk about throughout this panel. The downside is that it works both ways. And on the control side, if you automate too much, it is easy for these bad actors to kind of circumvent.
And so I like to contrast the low sophistication methods with both the high sophistication methods. And so have you seen any examples of where threat actors might be using automation or artificial intelligence or other ways to scale their operations, maybe for money launderings or more advanced forms of cash out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a couple examples that come to mind. One is what we see out of kind of North Korea and the state actor hacking groups. Thinking about things like Lazarus Group, which has been sanctioned by OFAC. If you think about just from the money laundering side, which is a very key component to these fraud operations, because you have to ultimately launder the funds. If you think about how money laundering kind of historically has happened on a more sophisticated level, and we're talking about kind of transnational money laundering that's multi-asset, multi-jurisdictional, multi-vehicle use. It was, you had to open up a shell account in another jurisdiction. You probably had to hire a lawyer or a CPA to help you do it. Anytime you wired funds from kind of one jurisdiction to another, the wire settles in 2 days, 3 days, right? Overall, just that process of creating a sophisticated money laundering machine was relatively slow, it was inefficient, and it was costly. And if you contrast that to what we see on the blockchain and again, these kind of North Korean state-sponsored hackers are the principal group. They are incredibly proficient at doing the kind of the reverse in terms of kind of creating a massive amount of accounts or cryptocurrency, wallet addresses. Within minutes, you can create hundreds or thousands of wallet addresses in a relatively short amount of time. And then you can program the series of transactions to happen in a way that just kind of creates this spider web that is incredibly difficult to track. They use a variety of different tactics. One we've seen a lot is obviously the use of mixers. If you're not familiar with mixers on the blockchain, they're essentially software code that is self-executing. And so the most notable instance was Tornado Cash. Again, it was not an entity, it was not a corporation, it was not a person, it was literally just code. And in using Tornado Cash obfuscates the trail of funds, and so you can't link deposits and withdrawals. So it's an incredibly effective kind of money laundering tactic. And North Korea used Tornado Cash to launder. I think we at TRM had done an analysis over $1 billion of funds, and almost 600 million in a single clip. Again, when you talk about speed and efficiency and the use of automation, that's pretty scary, right? And there were reports later that came out that said that the North Korean hacking group was using this to facilitate some of their nuclear proliferation program. So this is very much a kind of global security issue. We see these tactics as well with what we call CSAM. This is child sexual abuse material and threat actors in this space, and this is a really tragic industry. But again, one happening that we see, very much growing in scale, where they can use automation and AI to enhance maybe a passport photo, a low resolution video, enhance it so it looks more legitimate, in truly the seedier side of the business, they can use AI to create these awful images. And so, that they're bypass JavaScript codes and different things. They're very much, on the sophisticated end as well. And so again, it goes back to this idea that with every innovation, whether it's financial or technology wise, there's very much a benefit to society. But if we're not cognizant about the threat actors' use of this technology, and particularly the sophisticated ones, it is a hard problem to kind of course correct once it's hit scale.
I'm feverishly taking notes here, and I want to circle back to a few points you made about fraud just being a small scale issue that can greatly escalate and sort of being akin to death by 1,000 cuts. I think it might be nice to sort of bridge the gap between those low sophistication methods and the high sophistication. We started talking about synthetic identities, but in terms of North Korea, Lazarus Group, and their other associated state-sponsored groups operated in North Korea, they've definitely created fake profiles, synthetic identities, shell companies, done that to kind of in some ways scale that aspect of synthetic identities and individuals. And Michelle, I know you've done some research on deepfakes, and maybe you could tell us like some of the things that you've seen or observed of how people could be using artificial intelligence, automation to create fake profiles, maybe not for cybercrime cash outs or to take out credit cards, but maybe for job applications or other illicit purposes.
Yes, I can elaborate on that. Ian and Tom, it's great to be here with you as well. Threat actor groups have been using a variety of tactics and techniques to steal data from their target, including deepfake software. And for those who may not be familiar, this involves a combination of voice cloning and video cloning, and it allows anyone to take on the identity of a trusted persona. And while you're looking at this video, it may seem like the person, but ways you can identify if this is an actual deep fake is you can see glitches in the video if the audio is not necessarily syncing with the words of the speaker. For the sake of time, I will just elaborate on some known tactics of the Lazarus Group. The Lazarus Group has used LinkedIn to conduct spear phishing attacks against employees of targeted organizations. And they do this by creating fake profiles of recruiters, executives, or anyone that may be a reputable source related to a company. And then they use these profiles to send phishing emails. And once they send these emails, then their target or victim will click on a malicious link and they'll be directed to a website. And then from there, their device or system is compromised. Also, the Lazarus Group has something called Operation Dream Job. And I believe that they're taking advantage of people who are basically looking for, job stability while we're in the middle of inflation. And so what they do is they go onto LinkedIn, they post jobs, and they basically lure these fake job opportunities. They use it to lure victims to download and install malware infected software. Another tactic that they use with LinkedIn is that they use LinkedIn to infiltrate networks of their targeted organizations by connecting with employees and building relationships. And then once that relationship is established, the group can use these tactics to gain access to sensitive information. When you see these little notes on LinkedIn that says, make sure you know who you're connecting with, it's there for a reason. For example, when I was in graduate school, I noticed someone sent me a LinkedIn request and there were several known people in the group. However, I didn't recognize this person as being in any other groups with these people. So I sent a few notes to friends saying, hey, do you know this person? And no one actually knew who this person was. So I was like, hey, I think there's a possibility this person just kind of went along someone's list and reached out to everyone so they can look like a reputable source. So in scenarios like that, it's really good to know who you're connecting with on LinkedIn, because once someone is able to gain access to a network as a reputable source, then they can basically use that for their own personal gain. And as stated before, in addition to creating fake profiles, they can also create fake companies, and they will use this for whatever reason to come across as a reputable source and gain sensitive information so they can use it to get further data on their target.
So I feel like, Michelle, you're talking about some existential issues here in terms of what is a person online and how can we verify who is real and who's not? And on top of that, how can we show that a company is real? Because I think we've seen deep fakes used for a variety of purposes, like Tom mentioned with CSAM or for LinkedIn accounts, but also for business email account compromise, where not only an image could be faked or manipulated or generated, but also a voice could potentially be copied or duplicated. And Michelle, I don't know if have you seen anything like that?
Yes. So basically, there's people who, once they start working with a company, let's say they don't feel like going to work, then they can hire someone to pretend to be them and then do the work for them. So there's actually software out there. You can look it up to, see if it's something that you would prefer to use. I don't know if I can plug them or not, but there is software that you can use to actually identify whether or not you are, if it's deep fake software that's actually being used or if this is actually authentic. But yeah, I think that the best way that you can identify whether or not it's authentic is just kind of look for certain things. If the company has a misspelled word, if the email is not accurate, those are just like little easy key giveaways.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add there, and you mentioned voice kind of faking. I was just listening to an example from a prosecutor out here in California who was working a case where I guess the bad actor had access to phone records or had heard kind of or public examples of how a person sounds, and so they kind of compromised this person. They called up a elderly member of the family and said, I've been in a terrible car wreck, been in a terrible accident. I need $10,000 quickly to help me out of this mess, and really plays upon the emotions. And the person cannot tell that on the other end of the phone, this is not my son, my uncle, my brother, whoever it may be, because the bad actor is so good at kind of faking the voice. That's as we think about like controls, on the banking side, you mentioned business email compromises, right? The standard that we always said, back at Goldman Sachs when I was there was, you can always make the call to the client and get them on the phone. And that's the full safe. We've got all these other controls, but at the end of the day, just get them on the phone. And maybe you can't do that anymore, particularly for people with public profiles where there's any number of videos on YouTube or in the public domain where they can have a training set of data of how their voice sounds.
So what is the best way to resolve some of these issues? Because as we've highlighted, companies want to implement automation to make their jobs easier. Several companies have implemented ChatGPT or BART or similar mechanisms. Adversaries, we've read a few reports in open source about how adversaries are generating code or just improving their tactics, techniques, and procedures. We do have a number of ways to make things more difficult, as Tom highlighted, in terms of incorporating businesses, setting up companies, but it seems like adversaries are just able to bypass these things. It's like a adversarial game of cat and mouse. What are the recommendations for some ways that we can maybe apply some friction or additional leverage to stop some of these tactics?
Well, I will just jump in and use this also as a segue to talk about automation and the healthcare system, for example. While AI is definitely helping out, I definitely would not rule out keeping humans around, if you will, because AI in general is used to help with reducing workload and preventing errors. For example, with electronic medical and health records, we're seeing AI is being used more to prevent or reduce errors. Studies have shown that AI is basically, these systems learn from accurate representative data, and there can be problems if that information reflects underlying biases and inequalities in the health system, for example. Studies show that patients from a certain ethnic group, let's call them ethnic group A, may receive, on average, less treatment for pain than patients from another ethnic group, let's call them group B. An AI system learning from health system records might learn to suggest lower doses of painkillers for patients in group A, even though that decision reflects systemic bias and not what is medically needed. So in scenarios like this, I think until we really have a true way to detect or regulate this better, we should definitely keep humans involved. And to Tom's note, when it comes to the call is the safest way to make sure you're on with the client, there needs to be another method of security added. Voice recognition is also a part of multi-factor authentication, but that's not really a good source anymore unless you add questions that can be asked over the phone that only the client would know. But then again, with social engineering and people putting their life on social media, I don't think that we can really rely on voice as much as we used to.
Yeah, I love those points that Michelle noted. It's funny. I was playing around with ChatGPT just the other day, and I said the prompt I gave it was, "Tell me how to circumvent money laundering controls using shell entities in offshore jurisdictions." And if you ask it something so obvious that you are trying to do something unethical, it'll say something like, and the answer to this question was, "I'm an AI, model, and this breaks my ethical guidelines or whatever, and so I can't give you the answer." But if you change the prompt and you say, show me how to open up a C Corp in the Marshall Islands with a nominee shareholder, it'll go, "Okay, great. Here's the 7 steps that you need to do that," which can be akin to the same thing. And so I appreciate that. I think we're in the very, very early stages of these AI models, and they're trying to make some effort to put in some sort of guidelines. But as the last kind of panel touched on, they don't have judgment. And that's a particular problem as these, kind of go out into the wild and start scaling. On the kind of company side, one of the things we talk a lot about at TRM with a lot of our customers is risk assessments. And what we see a lot in this space sometimes is a little bit of a checkbox exercise to this, and people just kind of going through the motions in terms of, okay, what are the risks, what are the vulnerabilities, and it's very kind of checkbox, and it's not very specific. And you just can't do that in this age. The risk assessment, whether it's kind of money laundering or cybersecurity controls or whatever it may be, really needs to be kind of risk specific and control specific. And things like, do you have real-time intelligence that you're using to inform your org from the likes of Flashpoint or TRM Labs or whoever it may be to show you what the current kind of risk landscape looks like? And have you gone through kind of exercises in case there's a compromise and have, again, that kind of control specificity that matches each risk and each kind of vulnerability. And I think that, we don't see enough of that kind of rigor in some of the risk assessments, which I think is really, really important. And maybe the last thing I'll mention, just on, again, in the kind of blockchain intelligence space, it's kind of the first time that I've been optimistic about the cat and mouse game. We have very, very much been behind the bad actors in terms of, knowing what their techniques are. But, Ian mentioned the Hydra report that we put out together with Flashpoint. And that was an incredible example where we can see in real time how criminal networks are evolving, what tactics they're using, how they're moving their funds, what new actors are popping up in this space. And so just again, in kind of the blockchain intelligence crypto world, one of the beauties of the public database that is kind of, distributed ledger technology is that you can see these happening in kind of real time. We can see how North Korean actors are moving their flow of funds, and then we can create ways to detect those anomalies and those patterns in a way that we've just never been able to do before. And so there is a lot of promise in kind of leveraging the technology to create better controls and to create a little bit of a safer system. But it's absolutely an uphill battle.
So we have 5 minutes left, so I'll try to be quick. So we create a lot of systems in place to help mitigate a lot of these issues by establishing controls, some of which have been stated already. And just to go back to those synthetic identities, we try to make it more difficult for someone to apply for credit, but also we need to have automated systems in place so you don't have to wait 10 days for Social Security Form 89 to come back from the Social Security Administration. So we maybe have ways of measuring entropy or different indicators that someone might be legitimate or fraudulent. And we use that for PCI DSS to identify fraud. And it helps us kind of scale and look for anomalies. And so I guess what I'm sort of wondering out loud is compliance a hindrance? Or is there a way that we can maybe form it to help us enable new technology, automated tools, and automation?
I'm certainly biased as a career compliance officer, that it's not necessarily a hindrance to business. Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right, but I think in the design phase of the business, of the automation, of training models and all that type of thing. Again, I'm very biased, but compliance needs to have a seat at the table, and risk needs to have a seat at the table, so that as these are developing and growing and being kind of just laid out in the early stages, this can very much be a part of the conversation, as opposed to we roll everything out. We'll loop in, the compliance and risk folks at the end, and they can figure it out after we go. Again, it needs to be incorporated at the early stages of these, whether it's again models or controls or whatever it may be.
And on that, I'm sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
I definitely agree with Tom. Compliance definitely needs to be a part of this. I'll just throw this out because I know we're short on time. Even though Elon Musk is a huge fan of AI, we all know that it's a huge part of his company. He's also calling for regulation, especially within the next 6 months. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Thanks, Michelle. And so do you think we can outsource any of this compliance or risk assessment? Can it be done by a machine, or should this be humans doing this?
I think it should be humans doing this, while we feel that AI will, or the talk, if you will, is that AI will definitely continue to grow. It'll be a part of our everyday life, from wearable devices and so on. I believe the human element will always be very important if we want to have true regulation.
Yeah, I think, I've heard when we talk about ChatGPT that it may displace some, basic kind of coding functions and that type of thing. But that makes it so that every, data scientist is now like a 10x data scientist or an engineer, right? And so I very much think that, the obvious answer is that both are necessary. You can't actually displace a lot of human intuition and judgment, but we can make each kind of human 10 times more effective, I think, by using a variety of, heuristics and different ways to kind of just problem solve this. But yeah, one can't displace the other. Both are necessary.
And maybe back to Michelle's comment about the moratorium on AI. Should we have some guards or controls in place where only specific people should be using these tools until there are better guidelines around what are the capabilities?
I definitely think so, because right now, while I think that they both are needed, I think that at the end of the day, AI is growing rapidly. We're seeing it used with everything. And Elon Musk is a trendsetter, if you will. And if he and other people are voicing concern, I believe that there is cause for concern. And I think that while it's great to embrace change and embrace an artificial intelligence, I think we should do it responsibly.
Thank you. And I don't know, we have a one more minute, so I'll take one from the Q&A here. So how will generative AI impact KYC ML investigations? And so Tom, I can send that one to you.
Yeah, I think, back to what I was saying, what I hope at least is that it superpowers the investigations, right? So and I'll just, we don't have time to talk about all the different facets of an AML compliance program, but on the investigation side, the behavioral pattern recognition, I think is really, really powerful. Historically, we've been casting really, really wide nets to try to catch bad actors. Using kind of AI models, we can be very, very razor focused. And again, that's a better way for the investigator to start, as opposed to trying to boil the ocean. So that's the optimistic ideal.
See, Kathleen is here. So thank you both for your time, your comments, your feedback.
Well, thank you all very, very much. I think that you described really well how much harder it is to keep the perimeter secure or keep those doors and windows closed when we've got AI-driven threat actors. So really useful conversation. Thank you so much.